All right. So I don't know if this is going to be a series. I always say that. But I kind of figured I wanted to um, kind of read my short essay and then go through explaining some of it. And then, um, yeah, so I'm just going to go through my essay, explain some of it. I'm going to preface it, So the title of the essay is called a bad letting, right? Um, the reason why I kind of wrote this piece is because I've noticed that. Well, I've always kind of noticed it, but I think I finally got around to writing it. Um, is that in our popular culture, popular in our popular culture today, it's pretty common to kind of express the phrase, you gotta let go, you gotta let be, you gotta go with the flow, per se. And what's so funny about those things is that most people don't know how to do that. Most people don't know how to be free, how to let go, and they genuinely really struggle with that idea. And I want to make sure that I point out why we can't do it, and why it's almost pointless to do it in some sense. And I will kind of show why it's pointless as such. But yeah, let me just go through it real quick. So this is the essay. Um, we perversely enjoy surrendering. Indeed, such action comes with little controversy when confronted with its opposite, possession. But despite how good surrender or letting may be, we are terrible at it. We fool ourselves into thinking we can challenge ourselves by letting go of everything. To be relentlessly carefree in the face of pure demand, yet none of us can elude the demand. I can reframe the error of lousy surrender, making it less opaque to a naive mind. The error is found in the idea that one can surrender first while avoiding the error, the horror, and enjoyment of control and possession. But let us entertain the error and why it helplessly fails. If one is to surrender first, what precisely is being offered? Do we not find it bewildering that we attempt to surrender when surrendering implies a prior possession? How can one surrender when there is nothing to offer? How can you strive to yield before the act of possession? Thereby, you cannot let go of something you never possessed. Our anxiety about being duped or fooled puts us in a mode of avoidance. A bad surrender is nothing but a fear of being duped. Control and possession continue to dupe us, contracting and shrinking our being. Finally, in agony, we come to a wise conclusion: we must let go. Yet, to our demise, the execution of such wisdom lacks. The paradox haunts us. The desire to let go results in the possession of letting go. In our attempt to avoid being duped, we are duped. We cannot possess our own surrender. The pathological obsession with letting go comes into contradiction. You cannot let go amid your futile attempts. What then is a good letting go? Such a notion can only be realized when one has been duped, not in possession, but in the failure of possession. What does this mean? Our impossible satisfaction with control reveals that nothing can be possessed. We respond by letting go, but letting go also assumes possession was possible in the first place. Here we encounter the most violent realization. if possession itself is impossible due to its inevitable failure, the very act of letting go is also impossible. Control was never possible. Making surrender a laughable action, the irony becomes more horrific. Possession and surrender are of the same cloth. You must possess until you realize possession is impossible. And it is in being duped by control that you have already surrendered. Therefore, surrender was there from the beginning, that you cannot possess anything. The enjoyment of being deceived is knowing that to surrender something is also to surrender nothing, the nothing of something you can never own. And that's the end of my short piece. Okay, so what do I mean by this? What I mean by this, and I'm going to try to give concrete examples, and it's always difficult giving more concrete examples. But essentially, the idea of letting go, right, assumes that you had something to let go in the first place. That's what I'm trying to point out, right? And I'm pointing out this irony because what I'm trying to say is that the idea, the very action of letting go is almost fruitless, meaning that you don't actually have to try to let go. This is my whole point, that you don't have to try to do this action. The action, so to speak, is already there in your attempt to possess something. Because in your attempt to possess something, you realize through its failure of possession that you can't possess it. And the fact that you can't possess it means that you can't have it. And isn't letting go this kind of logic that I can't have it? But you see, the trap of letting go, of surrendering, is almost a very tricky position because, one, I think in society today we can have this notion where letting go can almost be like this virtual virtue signaling kind of thing, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm letting go, and you should let go too, right? And all this other stuff. But no, letting go was never possible in the first place, mainly because you could never possess in the first place. And so to go back to why letting go doesn't work because the possession itself never worked, right? But not only that, is that I think the trap that we get into is that we never experienced, in some sense, at least it's possible, we never actually really experienced a failure in our possession. And that's something I'm still trying to think through. I'm sort of willing to change that idea. But yeah, because I feel like if you really met the failure of possession, then you would realize that letting go is kind of almost like a double entendre, right? Like you can't possess it, so there's no point in letting go, right? What are you trying to let go of if you can't have it, if you never could have had it? And so, but perhaps, and I'm perhaps willing to secede to this, is that maybe somebody can say, well, maybe a sort of rebuttal to what I'm saying is that somebody could say, well, maybe it is true that we can never possess something per se, but um, it could be true that we possess ideas, right? These ideas. But then that's to me that also follows a kind of follows the same trap too, in my opinion, because even the idea that you can possess your own ideas is, um, I can tell it's already being challenged through AI, especially with AI sort of mimicking art and everything else. Um, but yeah, again, the main point that I'm trying to say is that when we attempt to let go and we find that it's impossible, it's because we think we can actually possess letting go. And so this is the other trap, the idea that I can actually possess my own surrendering, that I can possess my own letting. But as Thomas Wynne liked to say, you must let the letting let. Um, and what does this look like? What does a letting let even mean? Um, I would like to frame this with an old essay that I read from Luther, Martin Luther, and he does this wonderful exposition on the commandments, and he says, basically he's like, what's funny about the commandments is that it says that you ought to, right? But ought to doesn't mean that you can. And I like Luther's phrase because what it exemplifies is that we tell each other a lot of things like we ought to, right? We ought to. But the ought to assumes that we can. And even though you ought to, once again, doesn't actually correlate to you actually can. And so this is the double move of being told or to let go. It's like yeah, you're right. I think nobody disagrees with the conclusion. Nobody disagrees with the conclusion that you ought to let go. Um, the problem is within the execution of these words. And what I'm trying to say is the reason why letting go is impossible is because ought doesn't mean you can. And when you realize that ought doesn't mean you can, then you ironically encounter a genuine letting go. And so essentially, what I'm trying to say is that the biggest trap of all, the biggest trap of all, is that we must let go of letting go. Or the way I like to phrase it is that we must let go of the fact that I cannot let go. And once you realize, and this will also go into the logic of exchange, once you realize that you cannot not exchange, right? That we can't help but have exchanges with each other. Once you realize that this is a sort of inevitable process, um, you can find your freedom in that, but we shouldn't reduce it to that alone. Um, and so, yes, I basically lead to this last conclusion of if if we could never really possess anything, then we remain where we are. Then, ironically, our starting position was already from a kind of letting go, right? Um, it means that there is nothing that you actually had to do other than acknowledge your starting position, meaning that it was never possible for you to possess anything. And once you realize that it was never possible for you to possess anything, um, you realize where you are. And when you realize where you are, that is, in some sense, your true surrender, your true letting. So you don't have to do anything extra. There's no exert force, in my opinion, that you have to do to reach this conclusion. The only thing that you have to do, per se, is realize the failure of possession. Once you realize the failure of possession, that you cannot possess it, then you realize that in the midst of you being incapable of possessing something, it means that your starting position from the beginning was surrendering, was letting go, right? Um, but as usual, the trap that we fall into is that we think because we can't possess something, we think, oh, well, I can at least possess letting go. But this also is a failure. Like, you will not be able to possess letting go. And it's something that I honestly I encountered all the time in when I used to be, like, into Buddhism and meditate and all that. I encountered it all the time because what frustrated me the most was, like, I was like, I don't understand how I can do meditation for legitimately no reason. Like, I struggled with that idea. I'm like, how can I do meditation for nothing? How can I put it in my mind that I'm doing meditation for nothing? And I struggled with that, because it was a logic that didn't make sense to me at the time. Um, I mean, now I understand it. The maneuver to do, in my opinion, for that position was to realize that I'm never going to be able to not think I'm doing something when I'm meditating. But once I realize that I'm helpless in my thinking about doing something for meditation, that's when I do meditation for nothing, right? But it took me a long time to understand that, from the beginning. But anyways, hopefully that makes some sense. I mean, and I know it's not entirely clear, but yeah. Anyways, I will leave you guys be. All right, take care. Bye.